We're learning the Sikha on Vayishlach, Yud-Tes Kislev, in Chelek on page 166. The shir today is being learned L'le Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. Oifem pasik katainti mikol hachasadim u'mikol v'gaimer. On the pasuk in this week's parsha, where Yaakov Avinu says that I feel small, I feel unworthy because of all the kindness and all of the emes. As the pasuk continues, Hashem was faithful to His promise for him. So the Alter Rebbe quotes this, is Mevayed the Alter Rebbe in seine Geres HaKodesh, or said, Geschrieben achar b'yosem mi-Peterburg. The Alter Rebbe explains in his letter that he wrote after he came home from Peterburg, where he was imprisoned, and after the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. So he explained this pasuk in relation to what he experienced as follows. Shebachol chesed v'chesed was da'ibishe tut mit ha-menschen. Every time Hashem does a kindness for a person, darf bei ihm peil sein, soll werden a shval ruach. This should change the person, that he should become humble. Weil the chesed is kirvas elikim mamish, because Hashem's kindness means that Hashem is now literally closer to you, in His connection to you. On was mer chesed, the more kindness a person experiences, versus mer kamei, meaning that you are then experiencing a greater closeness to be in front of Hashem, als mer is a bottle. The more you become nullified in your feeling of self, kala v'ayim efes, to become completely insignificant and to feel as you're totally nothingness in the presence of Hashem, which is expressed with this great kindness. Und der Rebbe hat Yaakov gesagt, katainti mikol hachasadim gaimer. Therefore, Yaakov says that katainti, I am humble, I'm small, because of the kindness, as durach ala chasadim, as the Rebbe hat mit him getan, through all the chasadim, the kindness that Hashem did for him, is Yaakov klein geworden in seinen Augen. Yaakov became humble in his eyes. Was das ist der Bittel, was kommt mitzad hakerov. This is when a person becomes nullified in the presence of Hashem when you're close, when you're in front of Hashem. That's the Alter Rebbe's interpretation of this pasuk. Now, Pirish Rashi ala pasuk, Rashi on the pasuk, which says differently, as the Rebbe quotes here, Nismatu zechiyosai al yedei chasadim v'ha'emes shastisi imi. That what Yaakov was saying here is, katainti means that the merits that I have been minimized because of the kindness and the truth, the faithfulness of Hashem to me that you have done for me. And lekach ani yareh, and therefore I'm afraid. He was afraid of Esav. Shema mishivtachtani nislachlachti bechet. Although Hashem promised him that He will protect him, but so why is he afraid? Because he's afraid that maybe he's become defiled through an avera. V'yigrim lili masav yadesam. Therefore, this would cause that I could be given over into the hands of Esav. So it's pshut shel mikra. So Rashi that explains this way, different than the Alter Rebbe, explains the simple understanding and the experience and the story of the pasuk regarding Yaakov. As masber, favas Yaakov had gebeten atzileni noch gaimer. Why is Yaakov davening and begging from Hashem that save me? If he had a clear promise, I will protect you, and I will be with you. After that, the promise, maybe I did something that now I'm not worthy of the fulfillment of that promise. That's how Rashi explains this. The Alter Rebbe is mefarish the Werter, katainti mikol hachasadim. The Alter Rebbe, when he explains the relevance and the meaning of the pasuk katainti mikol hachasadim, so he explains this view. This is a Torah hoira b'avodas Hashem. How this is a pasuk in Torah, and it's a lesson for every Yid serving Hashem, and therefore relevant and applicable for every Jew. As Gili Achsadim Shalamayla, when a Yid experiences a revelation of Hashem's kindness, darf poyelin as ozayin hashval ruach. That has to bring him to feel humble because of being in front of Hashem, to feel complete insignificance and not self-nullification in the presence of Hashem. So we have here two different pirushim, whether the point is that Yaakov is afraid of the chet, that maybe there was some misdeed that now he's not worthy of Hashem's promise, or no, the point there is the kindness of Hashem is a closeness, and the closeness is what causes humility. And Alter Rebbe is explaining it as a hayra for every single Yid, not a Yid that's necessarily in the situation of Yaakov where he has a promise. Additionally, why does the Alter Rebbe explain it the way he does? Dass sich behestem zum Chelek ha'ofen zwischen Yaakov sagen katainti und dem Ofen wie der Alter Rebbe schreibt Geras HaKodesh. So the way the Alter Rebbe explains it is also corresponding to what Yaakov had experienced was one thing. So therefore, in Pshutish Mikra, Rashi explains it one way. But what the Alter Rebbe is writing in his letter now is based on what he experienced. Yaakov, what is gesagt als Tfilo Bakasha. Yaakov is saying here Katainti as a prayer. When er is gestanden am Matzev, Maimed am Matzev, Shal Sakana, he's still in danger. And he's afraid of his brother Esav. The Rebbe is memazber, the sibba is pachad bakasha v'chulu. So the pasuk here is explaining what's the basis of Yaakov's fear and why he's davening now, if he had a clear promise. The Alter Rebbe wrote though this letter, quoting this pasuk, after he was released from prison. The says when there's a reis sakana, he was already out of danger. Und Yegeres is biyachad imahidot tzemevishim. This letter is written here along with the thanks that he's expressing to Hashem for the great miracle that happened. It's also guiding and actually warning his followers, as the Alter Rebbe writes in the letter, here I'm coming to put all the Chassidim, all the followers on notice that they should take notice of this point, that the great kindness that Hashem has done with us, and therefore they should not walk around with that pride and a sense of haughtiness. On the contrary, when you experience kindness, it should bring out a greater level of self-nullification and humility. So the experience of the Alter Rebbe, the way he's quoting the pasuk in connection to this, is masam de pirish. Here, the Alter Rebbe says the understanding of the pasuk, the way he explains it, when Hashem expresses kindness to a person, he should be very humble because of this closeness to Hashem. So it's two different explanations in the pasuk. Yaakov speaking about a matzav of sakana when he's still in danger and he's afraid, and Alter Rebbe after he was released from prison, and explaining to Chassidim, to the followers, how they should behave when you experience such great kindness. We still need to understand here, though, what Rashi here says on a deeper level. V is his takeshayich. How is it actually possible as Yaakov that Yaakov should be afraid that maybe he's been defiled through a sin? V is shayich by Yaakov. How is this even possible to happen, that we should say that Yaakov, one of the holy Avos, should be concerned that he did an Aveda? This Rashi says that Yaakov was concerned that his merits have been diminished as a result of the kindness that Hashem has done with him. Is move on. So that's understood. When a person experiences a miracle, so the miracle comes in merit of a schus, a certain something that a person deserves. So now that the miracle occurred to him, so that now that merit is sort of used up, he already got rewarded because of with this miracle, because of this schus he had. So therefore, there's a concern that maybe because there was so much misim and kindness that Hashem already did for Yaakov, so maybe his merits have been used up. That only explains why Yaakov was concerned that his merits that he had have been diminished or have been deducted already because of these miracles that have been done for him. But there's no reason to say, though, that therefore there's a sin here that should cause that Hashem's promise should be nullified. So why is Yaakov Avinu concerned that maybe there was a sin that's going to cause that the promise should not be fulfilled? Similar, we could ask regarding the Alter Rebbe. Now, the Alter Rebbe, as explained before, is quoting this pasuk not in a context where he's still in danger, where he's afraid. But nevertheless, if you look into the letter of the Alter Rebbe does quote the context of the story that Yaakov Avinu was experiencing. Because from them was the Alter Rebbe bringt in the Igeres HaKodesh Gufe, from the fact that the Alter Rebbe brings in this letter, Nit nor v'zui gam ken midaso shel Yaakov. He's not only bringing the pasuk that says by Yaakov and quoting in a general sense that this is Yaakov's attribute. He also brings the continuation and the explanation of the context of the story in these psukim, explaining what Yaakov was experiencing then. Yaakov was explaining why he's afraid, Mipnei Esav, his brother Esav, and why wasn't he relying on Hashem's clear promise? V'hinei anochi imachol, that Hashem says, I'll be with you. Because Yaakov felt very unworthy and very humble in his eyes. Because of the great experience of kindness, when he crossed the river with just a stick in his hands, and now Hashem has given him so much. And therefore he feels completely unworthy now of being saved from his brother Esav. And the Alter Rebbe goes on to quote also this, that Rashi brings, that Yaakov, in his eyes, he thought that maybe he has sinned, and therefore now the promise will not be fulfilled. So the Alter Rebbe actually is quoting the entire context of the story that Yaakov himself was experiencing. So if so, is mashma from this, it seems, Aleph, number 1, as the Pirish von Alten Rebbe in Katainti Geimer. The Alter Rebbe's pshat regarding what Katainti means, as das is the Bittul was kut mitzad Ribi Achsadim. This is a person's humility or self-nullification that's a result of experiencing great kindness and closeness to Hashem. Mitzad kirvas Hashem. Is verbunden mit dem Pirish HaPashet is connected to the simple pshat that Rashi says, as das meint the meire von Yaakovin weil nidme beinev shachata. That Yaakov is afraid because it seems to him that he has sinned. So even though as explained before in Sifalot, these are two completely different pirushim in different experiences, but Alter Rebbe, speaking about his experience and explaining the pasuk that it refers to the closeness to Hashem that brings him to feel humble and nullified in the presence of Hashem, he connects this, he brings it in connection to the experience of Yaakov, Nidma Beinev Shachata, that it appears to him that he has sinned and therefore he was afraid. Beis, another point we can see from the fact that Alter Rebbe goes and quotes the whole story with Yaakov, as euch der Inyan is negeit zum Matze, wie der Alter Rebbe is given acha beyasem mi Peterburg. That this point as well is relevant to the time now when the Alter Rebbe is writing his letter, even though he's already been released from prison. Yaakov was still in danger. The Alter Rebbe is out of danger, but nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe is quoting the story with Yaakov while he's in danger here at this time period as well. So it seems like that this was also relevant to the Alter Rebbe at this point, which will be explained later in the Sikha, why that is. Now here, the Rebbe says one point, Vayishlach, we can say about this, as the meint der euch zu merame sein, that one of the things that we could say that the Alter Rebbe is also hinting with this is, as nit kukendig deruf, not looking at the fact, what's noch seindig in Tfise, hat gehati auf Toche von Baal Shem Tov and Magid, that a similarity to the Alter Rebbe's situation, and in Yaakov Avinu, just like Yaakov Avinu had Hashem's promise, the Alter Rebbe also, when he was in prison, had a clear promise from both the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid that came to visit him, as wird befreit werden, that he'll be released, und wird noch kennen weiter megala sein Chassidus, and he'll be able to continue revealing Chassidus, und beyesses wie früher, and to a much greater extent than even before. So he had this clear promise. Von deswegen, euch acha beyasem mi Peterburg, but even after the Alter Rebbe is actually released, better the Meibishn of them. When he says now katainti, similar to Yaakov, after a promise is still davening, the Alter Rebbe here as well is also davening and begging Hashem that this should actually be fulfilled. But now we come back to the original question here, as was asked before regarding Yaakov Avinu. So now that we see that from what the Alter Rebbe writes, that the experience of Yaakov and the fear of Shemaz nislachlachti bechet, that perhaps I have sinned and the promise will not be fulfilled, applies to the Alter Rebbe as well, is it move on. So the question here is on the Alter Rebbe, wie is shayach by the Alter Rebbe azah inyan from katainti? How is it possible to say, regarding the Alter Rebbe, Katainti Shema Yigre Machet, that there's a sin that can cause that the promise would not be fulfilled? By the Yaakov Avinu or by the Alter Rebbe, a sin in the literal sense, in the simple sense, is impossible to speak about. So what does this mean? So B'chlalos is the Asbar B'zeh. So the general explanation for this is as follows. We're not speaking about a level of a sin in the literal sense. Rather, when a person gets elevated to a higher level, is a zach was in a niedrige Darge, is das nit gewen kein chet? So something, an action that was done when he was on a lower level, was not considered to be a sin at all. Now that he gets elevated to a high level, that very same action can be considered to be a sin based on the new level that he's on. Every level a person is on, there's a different level, a different standard. When a person is on a lower level in his perfection and his purity, so over there the level of perfection and purity that is expected in the standard of that level is one. Then when you get elevated to a higher level and there's a greater level of understanding and truth and perfection, so here the standard is much higher. And therefore, what was before perfect now becomes imperfect. Und der Pshat dem is, the meaning of this is as follows. Nicht nur, ob wird jetzt von das Neiton, dieselbe Meise, was das ist, wird es sein achet, das ist nicht das Achidisch. The point there is not only the fact that if now he repeats that same action that he did before when he was in a lower level, that even though previously that was okay, but now doing it again on a level where he's in a new standard, so today it would be considered to be something which is imperfect, that's obvious. Nor the friedige, schein abgetone Meise, but rather the point there is even something that has already been done before, when he was still on a lower level, and then on that standard it was considered to be perfect. Was b'shas asiyasa is init achet. And b'meile is ishayach by Yaakovin and beim Alten Rebbe. And therefore, we can say that such a thing is possible by Yaakov Avinu and by the Alten Rebbe, that on the level where they were doing what they did, on that level and on that standard, it was perfect. Is min itzter b'madregasa ha'al. However, now, when he gets elevated presently to a new and higher level, danai fear. Now he's going to be judged about that previous level. Now that he's been elevated to a new standard, nadaf oif ir tshuvata. Now he's going to have to correct and elevate those actions and those experiences from before based on the new standard and the new level that he's on, that is available to him. So now it's going to be necessary for him to go back and to elevate those experiences from before, to do tshuva for them. That's the kind of chet that we're talking about over here. Not chet on the literal level, but chet based on a new and higher level that a person comes to. That would now, what he did before as perfect, would now be imperfect. So that's the chet. Based on the chesed, when a person comes to a higher level of kirvas elikim, comes closer, comes higher, new standard, so therefore there's a new necessity for perfecting what has been done before, and it can be called as a chet in quotations. It's a level of a sin. Das is aber nicht masvik. This explanation, though, is insufficient. And this take, yes, it's true, as b'shas maise, is es kin chet nit gewen. When the person did what he did when he was on the lower level, it's not considered to be a sin. And yet we can say, as Bali Yosai, when he gets elevated to a higher level with a higher standard, kechet yechoshev. Now, what was before perfect is considered to be imperfect, and it's considered to be a sin. However, it must be said about this, as nit kein glatte Zach, hat es b'shas maise euch gedarft sein. We can't say actually that what was done before was completely 100% perfect. It has to be something that was not 100% perfect. It's just that on the level of purity and perfection of that level that he was on before, it's a standard that's okay. But to say that it was 100% perfect, that can't be said. If it's actually 100% and absolute perfect, is euch später nicht shaykh darauf kein Shuva. So then on any standard, it's not something which is relative, this standard, another standard, something that's really absolutely perfect, then there's no possibility to speak of the concept of tshuva even when it comes to a new level. Bleibt der Shaila, so if this is the case, the question remains, wie is shaykh as they sagen benegayat zu Yaakovin? How is it possible to say regarding Yaakov und noch benegayat zum Alten Rebbe, and afterwards regarding the Alter Rebbe, that there was something that was done that was not perfect, that required tshuva, based on a higher standard, based on a new level. But how is it possible to say that there was something that they did that was not so good, and now there's a necessity for tshuva, and that's the reason why they're saying katainti, that they feel like that maybe they've been defiled somewhat with even this imperfection of a lower level. So the Rebbe brings us, based on this concept here, that we're not talking about a chet and aveda in the literal sense that they were concerned about. That brings us another explanation of what Yaakov was saying when he said katainti. The panim yafis is mefarish der inyan from katainti mikol achsadim. The panim yafis explains what katainti mikol achsadim that Yaakov Avinu said was about. By the aliyas and neshamis from ein olam and ahecher and olam. By the neshamis of holy tzaddikim that get elevated from one level to another. Tzaddikim never have peace in the sense that they always go higher and higher in their level. Is Eides, is in an Oile, in the Hecher and Eilam, before they get elevated into the higher reality, into the higher world, in the new level, then is a Chayzerim Lakatnos. They return to a level where they actually have a certain downfall, meaning they lose what they had in the previous level, and they do not yet come to what they have now in this new world, in this new level that they come to, and in between there's a katnus. They fall in their level. Was das ist wie es retzich in der Akdame zum Chinuch Kotten, wegen dem Inyan von Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'Kam. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya speaks about the subject as well, and when the Alter Rebbe explains the concept of it, with the pasuk where it says that a tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up, if we're talking about a tzaddik, what does it mean that he falls? What it refers to is when a tzaddik is going from one level to the next, in that process, in between, when he's left the previous level, and before he comes to the higher level, there's an nefila, there's a downfall from where he was before, and he's not yet arrived to where he's going to. Ubalashon Panim Yafis, to use the way the Panim Yafis actually describes this. Tzvishin Gadlus Rishen, between the first level of height that a person came to, the level that he was on, Gadlus Sheni, the new level of height that a person comes to, is Do Katnus Sheni. There is a level where the person is lower. Now he's lower all in relation to the higher level that he's coming to. So it's Sheni, it's in the process of coming to the higher level, and therefore it's called Katnus Sheni. Now, this concept that the Panim Yafis explains here, the Rabbi gives an example, just to clarify this a little bit, in Order 15, the example of a person that's learning a subject, and he has a certain level of understanding on a subject. But then he wants to come to a higher and deeper level of understanding. So the process of this usually begins where a person realizes a certain question, or there's new information about the subject that's now the opening for him realizing that his level of understanding that he had till now was superficial and that he doesn't really have the proper accurate understanding. And the question itself and the lack of clarity will lead him then, this is the process itself that will lead him to finding the higher level of understanding and the accurate and deeper level of understanding in this subject. So now, that stage, this process in between, when the person sees a question on his original level of understanding, so he's already sort of moved away from that original understanding. He realizes that that's not it. On the other hand, he hasn't yet arrived to his conclusion in the higher level of understanding. But the very question itself is already the opening, the step, the question that opens up the door for him to see that there's something deeper going on over here. So therefore, he's already beginning his process to the new level, and this is what's called katnus, because at this point, there's still a confusion, there's still a lack of clarity. That's what we're talking about here, and this is in the process of a tzaddik that's growing from one level to the next, and especially when you're going from one level to the next, where the higher level is infinitely greater than the lower level, and therefore there's a very deep process in sort of breaking out of the previous level, and now coming to the new level where there's that nefila, there's that level of katnus in between in that process of coming to the new level. That's what we're talking about here. So now this explains also what Yaakov was saying. Und das is the Pirish Apostle Katainti Geimer, when it says there, when Yaakov says Katainti, that I'm small, because by the Aliyas, was Yaakov hat Eile gewend from Chutz La'aretz ken Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov is coming from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, so now this is a major change, a shift, not just from one level to the next that have some connection here, where the new level is based on where he was before, but he's coming to Eretz Yisrael, a whole new place, a level, a holy land. Is far der Aliyah given by im Katainti. So before he comes to this new level, there's the process of Katainti, where he's stepping away from where he was before, and now he's still in the process to come to the higher level. That's a time period of Katainti, of being small and having a certain experience of a sort of a downfall, a lack of clarity. And that's when Yaakov is saying, Katainti, Vapizeh Yuvan, But Yaakov would gebeten atzileni no miyadochem miyad Esav, and therefore he says, because of this condition that I'm in right now, therefore save me from my brother Esav. Vibalt as noch derav toche, since after the promise Hashem gave him. Onoich noch de friede galias, and also following the levels that Yaakov Avinu experienced when he went higher in his levels, coming to this point that he was in, is by him given that he from katainti. So he experienced this katainti of this process in between one level and another. In that process of the in-between, when there's a certain lack of clarity and a certain confusion, like the example I mentioned before, here is where Yaakov, this is the necessity for Yaakov to daven and ask of Hashem, atzileni no, that he shouldn't get lost in this process in between, and he shouldn't be able to be attacked by Esav. As he explains it in the Panim Yafis, as chach katnus sheni is hecha from gadlus rishon. Although katnus sheni is that level, and that process in between is actually a greater level than the original level that he was on. And as I explained before, the point of here is when you have that original understanding, so then you're in this reality where all you know of, all you're aware of is that basic and superficial understanding of the concept. Now, when you have a question, which is the opening leading you to something much greater, something much deeper, so that itself is already a step up. You realize that the basic understanding is not it. So that's greater than godless rishon. Afal became, but yet, vibaltos is fart an initial katnus. However, since this is a experience of katnus, an experience where he's still in the process of questioning and there's a lack of clarity, darf man dann haben a shmira gedayel. This is a time period where it's required to have an extra protection. That's the katainti that Yaakov is talking about. Okay, so now, based on this, we'll understand what the chet in this context over here is. What does it mean that there's a concept of a sin? We're talking about over here, about this step, this process of a person going from one level to the next. So now, based on this, the Rabbi says, Val derech zeh, similar to this, the pshat of the Panim Yofis, Yesh Levayid and Keshe from Pirush Rabbeinu Azokim and Pirush Rashi. We can explain the connection of the Alter Rebbe's pshat that says that the closeness to Hashem that comes out through a chesed brings a person to humility, and how that's connected to the pshat of the Alter Rebbe of a person being concerned about a chet, about an aveda, Yaakov Avinu being concerned about the aveda and therefore being afraid. So what's the connection here? So based on what we said, we could explain that what does it really mean? The concept of a chet, a sin, in this context here is miloshin. It doesn't mean a chet, it doesn't mean a sin at all, and not even something that's imperfect. It means miloshin aniyu shleimu b'ni chatoyim. I and my son Shleima are lacking. That's what the word chatoyim in that pasuk means. Asizda chesarin, which means katnus in zayin aveda, legabe zayin midamatzav achodosh. That now there's something that's lacking here in his aveda based on the new level that he's on. Like was described before regarding this person that's growing in his aveda, and when he begins the process of entering into the new level, so he stepped away from his previous level and now he's coming to the new level, but he's still only at the beginning. And therefore there's a chesaron in the level that he's on now based on this new level that he's coming to. That's the chatoyim, that there's something lacking over here in this process coming to the new level. That's the chet that we can say Rashi is talking about. So, and therefore we can say that this is connected to the Alter Rebbe's pshat, that a person feels humble and nullified in the presence of Hashem. Because on das gufe, this itself, that there's this process and this level of a chet, of a lack in a person's aveda is verbunden mit Ribya Chasadim, was the Rebbe shot getan mit Yaakov. And this is a result of the great level of kindness that Hashem showed Yaakov and gave Yaakov. Was hat bei ihm reis gebracht, and what this brought out from Yaakov Avinu, nit nur as nismatu zechiyosai. Not only the point of that now my the merits, Yaakov says, my merits have been minimized. Nor as an avedus Hashem gufe is b'pchinas katnus v'chesadim. That now because of the chasadim, according to the Alter Rebbe's pshat, that chasadim elevates you to a higher level to be closer to Hashem. So now that you're leaving your previous level and you're coming to a higher level, so here there's going to be a chasadim. There's a lack in the person's aveda when he's entering, in that process, entering into the new level, and he hasn't yet completely came to that openness in the new level. Because of the great level of closeness to Hashem, much more than before, darf die Avedis Hashem oich sein. So now he has to come and reach and attain this standard, this new level, much more than what was before. He has to step away from where he was before. Hashem, before described the process where a person himself is studying and learning and growing in his level of understanding, and there's a question that opens him up to a new level of understanding. But what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is, when Hashem shows you kindness, so from above, from Hashem's behalf, He's elevating you, and the person was in a lower level, and now there's the process of now coming to that new level that Hashem is opening up to you. So there's that katnos, when the person has not yet gained this, really to serve Hashem yet on this new level that has been revealed to him. And that's the katnos, that's the chet that Rashi is talking about. On Oibzen Aveda is nit azoi, and therefore if he's not yet there, and he's not yet serving Hashem on that level of this new revelation that Hashem is giving him, is a b'pchinas yiride unefila v'katnos. This is what Rashi is referring to when he says chet, that there is a certain level of below the revelation that he's coming to, but he's now in a certain level of a downfall between the level that he was on before and the new level that he's coming to, that Hashem has revealed to him. Okay, so now we understand what the concept of chet here is. both regarding Yaakov Avinu and also regarding the Alter Rebbe, and how the Alter Rebbe, he's quoting the entire story of Yaakov Avinu and connecting it to his pshat, because the two pshatim here, the pshat of the revelation of the Chasadim and the pshat of Rashi, that it's about being concerned about a chet, go together. As a result of the Chasadim, which elevates a person to a higher level, therefore, there's a concept of chet where the person is in that process and he's lacking the Aveda in connection to that new level that he has come to, because he's still in the process getting there. So that's the connection in the two Pirushim. Now, based on this, the Rebbe will explain why the Alter Rebbe is quoting the whole story of Yaakov Avinu in his letter, speaking about after he was already redeemed. Seemingly, the Alter Rebbe was in a time period, in an experience that's different than Yaakov, where Yaakov was still facing his brother. He had to go approach his brother, and he was still in danger. The Alter Rebbe was out of danger. Okay, so the Rebbe before said one point about the fact that both Yaakov and the Alter Rebbe had a haftacha, a promise. So here there's another point also, looking at the way the Alter Rebbe experienced this redemption, how this came about, based on what we just learned here regarding the level of Mechayel al-Choyel, the growth of a tzaddik when he comes to a new height, a new level. So just like the Panim Yafis explains this process of a tzaddik growing in his Aveda, we can see how this played out also by the Alter Rebbe. Now, says Yidu'at, known as Rinyan from Yefutza Menesecha Chutza, that this, durch the Alter Rebbe, this that the Alter Rebbe spread the well springs of Chassidus outwardly, hat sich beeke angeheben nach sein Kommen from Peterburg. Primarily began after the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. He came home from Peterburg. Was das beweist auf ein Geudel ha'aliyah Gadlus, zu welcher der Alter Rebbe ist zugekommen nach Peterburg, im Vergleich mit der Gadlus vom Far Peterburg. This is showing us what kind of a new level, great higher level the Alter Rebbe came to after he was released from prison, much greater than where he was on, the level he was on, the Gadlus, the great level that he was on before he was in prison. Is zwischen die Gadlusche Keiten Peterburg und sein Gadlus shel Amayla Makedene, shel Achre Peterburg, between these two levels, before and after, is by him given den Inyan von Katanti. The Alter Rebbe experiences in this process of growing from one level to the other, this level of Katanti where there is a downfall, so to speak. Der Meiser von Alten Rebbe. And that's why you have the imprisonment in between. Just like in the case where a person wants to grow from one level of understanding to another, there has to be that level of confusion and sometimes even painful experience in trying to grapple with an idea. The Alter Rebbe here, from one level to the next, experiences imprisonment, which is this process of Katanti. Der Meiser hat doch mit sich gebracht viele und große Yisurim. The imprisonment was an experience that was very painful. Ukiyudua was the Baditchever had gemont by Alter Rebbe when he gave his arrest. It's known that the Levi Yitzchak Baditchever demanded and asked the Alter Rebbe regarding the fact that he was in prison, for was hat so viel genommen of seine Plätzes? Why has he taken upon himself, on his shoulders, all of this? So viel Yisuri Klal Yisrael, so much pain and suffering of Yidden that he took upon himself. Yisurim Shomayla, the suffering above, so to speak. Aire Yisuri HaNefesh v'Yisuri HaGuf. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Baditchever tells Alter Rebbe, your own personal pain, spiritually and physically, we could have all accomplished this new breakthrough to spread Chassidus just by makifim, which is a great, infinite, godly revelation, without going through this tedious process of breaking it through by sitting in prison. Was das hat gesagt, der Baditchever benegeh die Yisurim von der Meiser Gufe. Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever is telling the Alter Rebbe all of this, describing the condition of the painful experience of the imprisonment itself. And actually, even the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. Then noch gewenjes die Surim was the Alter Rebbe had gehat in die 3 Shana Chamaiser. The Alter Rebbe continued suffering additional 3 hours after he was brought home, and he was brought into the wrong apartment of the house that he came to. And there, the Alter Rebbe was in the house of the Misnagid for 3 hours, where it was also a great suffering. To the point, it was a greater suffering, those 3 hours, even more than the entire imprisonment. So it's verstandig, so if so we understand, as begilui is das Gewen Katnus oder Unefile, a viel legabe der friedige Madregis Gadlus von Alten Rebbe. That during this time, in that process of to grow, that comes in between, when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, here, the Alter Rebbe was on a level of katnus, and there was a downgrade from the level that he was on before prison. And of course, in relation to what he came to afterwards with the Alter Rebbe, even in relation to before, this was a downgrade. The Alter Rebbe was suffering in prison. Und wie wir sehen von der Rede von der Rebbe Rashab Nishma Seiden, as we could also understand from the words that the Rebbe Rashab said, as Chotsch, as es schwer, as wie zu sagen. The Rebbe Rashab expressed himself, even though it's difficult to say this, von deswegen, but nevertheless, is doch das sei. The fact is this way, as the Gilui Oyer, was is gekommen Achre Peterburg, that the great revelation that came after the imprisonment in Peterburg is das Gewen. This could be compared to Al Derech Maimer Azal, the expression that it says in the Gemara, Hazayis Keshekaitchen say Moitzi Shamnai. You take an olive and you crush it. Only through the process of crushing, then you extract the oil. From them, mashal is move on. So what do we understand from this analogy? As b'shas ha'maiser is given a katnus afila legabi kaidem Peterburg. That in this time period when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, so he was experiencing a downgrade in his level, even in comparison to where he was before. As we see it in this mashal of the olive. The eis ketishas hazayis, when you crush an olive, was the zayis licked onto the press, so the olive is there under the press. From Mokded Dochnit came eine von die beide Meiles. So at that point he doesn't have anything. He doesn't have any quality that could be used. The quality that it's going to come out later is not here yet. It hasn't yet produced the oil has not flowed yet that can be used to light candles and illuminate the entire world. And in this condition, being there under the press, the quality that it had before is not available anymore when it is given a peri, when it was just a fruit, an olive. So even though previously, when it was just a fruit, you don't have the oil that can be used to light and to create light, but it was a fruit that you can eat. But in that time period, when it's being pressed, during that time when it's under the press and being pressed, it's not a fruit anymore, and you don't have the oil yet available. So that's the time in between, which is a downgrade from before and after. So it's understood similar regarding this time period when the Alter Rebbe was imprisoned. As nit nor is noch demot nit gewend die Afotzes Amayanes wie noch Peterburg. Not only did Alter Rebbe not yet come to this level to spread the wellspring of Chassidus, as he did later, nor es hat doch dann b'shas ha'maiser euch nit geken sein ken Afotzes Chassidus. At that time when he was in prison, it wasn't possible for him to spread any Chassidus at all. In the Meifen wie der Alter Rebbe hat es getan for Peterburg. The way he was able to speak and explain the subjects of Chassidus before Peterburg. So therefore here we see exactly this concept that the Panim Yafis explains, that between one level and the other there's an afila, there's a sort of a downfall or a downgrade even from the level that one is on before in this process of growth. Not that Inyan, was in jener Zeit is gewend die Efshadet Sumeif is nit gewend die Efshadet Sumeif is sein Chassidus. This, that Alter Rebbe, being in prison, was not able to spread Chassidus and teach, is given a gay oichdem Alter Rebbe malein. It's not only that the followers and the listeners were losing out at this time, but this is something that was relevant and affected and was a downgrade, so to speak, for the Alter Rebbe himself. Or Kamuvan from Inyan Avram Avinu, we understand this from what we find regarding Avram. Be'ez hat nit gekent goim l'chasadim zayin b'achnas esarchim. Was is gewähnt, was is nicht gewähnt, ken Erchim. But when Avraham Avinu wasn't able to do what his entire life was all about, to invite guests and to do chesed when there was no guests. So it wasn't only the fact that the guests did not experience Avraham's goodness, but Avraham himself had pain from this. And most definitely this is so here in the case of the Alter Rebbe. Das Retzach wegen Gemilas Chasadim begashmis, Arbien, Kaidem Matan Teire. The pain of Avraham Avinu regarding his Gemilas Chesed is a Gemilas Chesed materially, and for even Arabs, and before Matan Torah. But nevertheless, Avraham Avinu has sar from this. Allah has kama v'kama, how much more so than das Retzach v'la'achri Matan Torah. Here, it's after Matan Torah und zu Yidden. Alter Rebbe teaching Yidden. Und wegen Talmud Torah, and teaching them Torah. Und mikol shekeim Talmud Torah der Rabbi. Alter Rebbe was a teacher of many. On Alachas Kama V'Kama Pnimiyus of Torah, and definitely the fact that he's teaching the secrets of Torah, the Pnimiyus of Torah, and in this time period, Alter Rebbe doesn't have that ability. So therefore, this is a katainti, this is a downgrade from where the Alter Rebbe was on before. Und der Pfarr hat geschrieben, Katainti v'cholo. And therefore the Alter Rebbe begins his letter with this pasuk of Katainti, because the experience of the Alter Rebbe is similar to the way the Pranim Yafis explains it was by Yaakov Avinu going from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael. So in between, there was this process of Katainti by the Alter Rebbe as well, in between the level that he was on before Peterburg. And after, there was this process and this time of Katainti, and therefore the Alter Rebbe writes a letter speaking about this level of Katainti that he was experiencing. And it seems like here the Rebbe is adding in order 29 that this level of Katainti that the Alter Rebbe had to come to the new level of spreading Chassidus on a completely new level was still something that Alter Rebbe was in at this time when he was writing the letter. Even though he was physically released from prison and out of danger in that sense, but the Katainti process, coming to the new level of Hafatzas Hamayanas Chutzah that he came to after Peterburg, at the time of the Alter Rebbe writing this letter, he was expressing that Katainti level, that process coming to this new level that he was still in. Abachol, Shana V'Shana, every single year, Yud-Tes Kislev, Chazan is a chibur di'inyanim. The occurrence and the revelation of the day comes back. Just like all matters begin with Teire, Dribbe lehnt men beteire b'Shabbos asmuchal Yud-Tes Kislev, Adab Yud-Tes Kislev Atzmai, Katainti mekolach sadam v'gaimer. So therefore, we read, everything begins in Teire, so we read in Teire, always, by the Shabbos, before Yud-Tes Kislev, or on Yud-Tes Kislev itself, this pasuk of Katainti mekolach sadam, which is very much related to the experience of the Alter Rebbe in prison, and when he was released. Das is the bakasha from Yaakov Avinu, from the Nesiyah Yisrael. This is the request of both Yaakov and all the Nesiyah Yisrael, the Rabbeim. Wie es wird gebracht in Kilas Yaakov as Nasi is Rashi Tevis, Nitzutze shel Yaakov Avinu. That Nasi, a leader, is one that has an neshama, which is a spark of Yaakov Avinu in his generation, or befrat from the Malten Rebbe, and especially the request of the Alter Rebbe was his enemy mispalol on euch vayeden Yidden, they daven, and also on behalf of every single Jew, as nit kukendik darauf, was Katainti geimer, that although a person may find himself in a condition of Katainti, based on what we learned before, that a person is growing, and in that level, in that growth, there's certain growth pains and a certain confusion and lack of clarity when he's coming from one level to another. But here, through this Katainti, it should be fulfilled, the Avtacha, the promise, Hashem promised Yaakov Avinu, Heitev, Eitev imach, that I will do good for you, and V'samti ezaracha k'choil hayom, and your descendants will be like the sand by the water, Asher lo yisafim erayv, that will not be able to be counted.